Hello, and welcome to the Nourish with Purpose podcast. It's Bailey, and I am so glad you're here listening to this podcast on Wednesday or whenever you're listening to it. Today, we are going to be talking about doing things differently and how you can really navigate your purpose and resist change or not resist change. So I wanted to start off this episode with just giving a little bit of a catch up because we are going to be doing these for a long time, and I always know when I listen to podcasts, it's so fun to listen to what they're up to, what they're doing, and really just feel like I know them, even if I don't really know them in real life. So what have I been up to? I feel like this past week was pretty chill. The weekend was a little bit crazy. On Saturday, I was invited to a brunch, and so that was such a blast. It was such an incredible spread of food, and I honestly went and didn't know anybody personally at the brunch, so it was extremely out of my comfort zone. I definitely was hesitant on if I wanted to go, even though I knew I would have so much fun when I was there. It's always like that premeditative, like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to know anybody. Like, am I going to say something stupid? Am I going to be well received? And it was wonderful. It was such a good time. Jessie, they hosted it at her house, and she has 6 chickens. And so she had gone to the farmer's market, and we got to feed them some corn, which is just so fun. If you know me, you know I'm kind of a crazy chicken lady. Right now, 3 of our chickens died, but I have 6 laying hens, and then in August we're going to be getting more broilers, and we'll be raising them for 6 weeks. So I really love my chickens, and so to see her have some in town, we were in Omaha, it was just so fun, and like I had said, great conversation, such a great group of women to talk to. A lot of us were entrepreneurs, so it was fun to just hear kind of what their day-to-day looks like, what they do for a living, and just learn more about other people. That's always something that I feel like I am really trying to focus a lot more on is connection. It's not something that really comes easily to me because although I love talking to new people and getting to know new people, I'm very much an introvert, so doing that was a little bit, like I said, out of my comfort zone, not something I typically do, but had a great time. And then that evening, we went to the Burwell Rodeo, which is something my family tries to go to almost every single year. We didn't go last year, but my grandpa kind of instilled it within my family that that's just something we do in the summer. And so they went on a separate day, but I went with my parents and then my husband, Nate, and I just love a good rodeo. It was so entertaining, so fun, and I would say probably my favorite part is where they have to saddle wild horses and then ride them a lap around the arena. It's always so chaotic and it's always so entertaining because they're like trying to hold down a wild horse, put a saddle on it, and then somebody has to get on and ride it around. And these are horses that are not used to being ridden, so they kind of go wherever they want to, and it's really entertaining. So that was definitely a highlight. Got some cotton candy and some good barbecue, so that's always a win in my book. Other than that, though, I've really just been working, spending some relaxing evenings at home, and I also want to get into the segment today of how I'm nourishing my body, mind, and spirit, because that kind of gives a little bit more into what I've been doing the past week as well. So this is a segment I always love to do at the beginning of an episode because this podcast is called Nourish with Purpose. In order to have ultimate wellness, I truly believe your body, mind, and spirit have to be aligned. And if one is not aligned, then that is when you're going to start noticing maybe your mindset is just very poor about yourself or your self-worth, or you're not feeling like moving your body, therefore you don't really feel motivated to work on improving your mindset and spending dedicated time with God through your spirit. So you can quickly see how closely these are all related. And so that's why I like to just share what I'm doing, because maybe it'll also encourage you to dive into what you want to do this next week to nourish your body, mind, and spirit. So starting first off with body, I'm actually have gotten into running, and I've shared just a little bit about this because I am training for my first half marathon. But to be completely honest, I don't really want to be held to that because it's kind of intimidating. And the furthest that I've been running with a friend, Olivia, and the furthest that we've ran is 6 miles, which in itself feels like an accomplishment to me because definitely not a runner. I mean, I did track in high school, but after that, since I had all of those issues with my health and my back injuries, which I shared about on the first episode. If you haven't listened to that, I highly would encourage you to do that. But I just honestly never thought that I would run again. And I never really had any desire to run again until I've started seeing a lot of people get back into running after there was some market to market. No, that was a group thing. I don't know, there was something going on in Lincoln where a lot of people I knew ran a full marathon, and I'm like, okay, come on, surely I can run a half marathon. So in May, we set out to do that. So we've been very consistent with training, running 2 to 3 times a week. This past week, I got up to running 6 miles, which, like I said, that is an accomplishment in my book. But so I've really been loving that, honestly, and I never thought I would say that because definitely running was not on my list of wanting things to do, or not really a way that I liked to move my body. I always, kind of preach find ways to move your body that you enjoy, and definitely did not enjoy that for the longest time. But I've gotten back into it. My body has luckily held up pretty well with doing this, which is a miracle because I had, shin splints, fractures in my shins, and I just didn't think I was cut out for it. And so to be able to actually slowly increase the mileage that I'm doing each week has been really, really rewarding. How I'm nourishing my mind. I've started to read before bed. This is maybe 10 to 15 minutes, nothing significant. But my husband and I typically watch TV before bed just because that's kind of how we shut off our brain. And so when I get into bed, I want something I can do to, again, kind of ease my wandering mind, help me to just, fall into a deep sleep faster. And reading seems to do that. So I've been reading the book by Colleen Hoover called Never Never. And I'm only about 4 chapters in, but I would highly encourage it. I feel like I've read almost every one of her books. And so I'm constantly on the hunt for one that I haven't read. And I have not read, obviously, this one. And so it's been extremely engaging. I'm very intrigued by the book. How it started was very strong. So if you like romance, but also a little bit of mystery and suspense, definitely a book for you to check out. And then with my spirit, I have actually started using the 5-minute journal. You've probably heard of this if you've been on TikTok or even Instagram. I feel like a lot of people used it or are using it, and I absolutely love it. It is something I got for my birthday from my mom, and I've been using it for about a week and a half, I believe. And it really has you focus on gratitude, affirmations, goals for the day. There's one question and I just love it. By the end of today, you'll feel accomplished if, and then you write what would happen. And it puts my game plan for the day in a perspective of, I don't need to do a million things today to accomplish something. I really can just focus on a few things and do those really, really well. And my goal will have been accomplished. So I'm loving that. And with that, I also do a Bible study in the mornings. I'm reading the book of Job right now, or Job, I don't know, Job. And that I am really liking. I'm working my way through that after reading Ecclesiastes because they are a little bit parallel in the sense of it's somebody's struggle with the world and things that are happening to them. But with Ecclesiastes, it's more about external, what's happening in the world versus what's happening in Job. It's what's happening to him. And so, Satan tempts him and all of these terrible things happen, and he still remains faithful to God when his friends tell him that, God is punishing him. And Anyway, I'm in chapter 5 of that. So not super far, but I really am loving that as well. Just having, the time in the morning to read a couple chapters of my Bible before I get on with the rest of my day always just feels very centering. Like I'm very calm and ready to get my day started. So let's go ahead and get into kind of the core of this episode. So this episode is called Live Differently, Navigating Your Purpose and Resisting Change. So I really wanted to talk about this today because, two things. My business is called Divine Purpose, and for a long time, I always linked my occupation to my job. And I think that's kind of where the name came from, but my belief around it has evolved over time. But like I was saying, I, for so long, put an emphasis on what my purpose is and linked that to, a job or a title that I could give myself so I could share it with other people, right? It was always kind of with that external validation in mind rather than what I truly believe like my inner purpose to be. And so I wanted to start out too by just giving the definition of purpose so we are both kind of on the same page here. So the definition of purpose is the reason for which something is done or created or for which something exists. So when we think about purpose like that, we no longer really feel the need to link it to an occupation, a major or minor in college, or the title that you have or that you want to hold, right? The reason we exist is not to work a job. Rather, the reason we exist is to have the characteristics and the drive to want to fulfill an occupation. And so what is your purpose? That's a question we kind of ask ourselves. I feel like especially in our 20s, it's very prominent of like, what are you doing after, I think it even goes back to high school and even middle school. It's like, when you graduate high school, where are you going to college? What are you majoring in? And then once you do graduate from college, spent 4 years studying something, it's like, what job are you going to get? And a lot of times it's like, I don't know. Like, how am I supposed to know at the age of 18 what I want to do for the next 60 years? And that was always kind of, I feel like an expectation that I had for myself is that I would find one job and stick solely to that job forever and ever and ever until I retired. But when you start to look at the lifespan of your parents or your grandparents, you start to notice that at your age, they were doing something so completely different than they're doing right now. I had the chance to talk to my grandparents on my birthday. We had them over and they were talking about how when they were in their 18, 19, 20, 21, they were, and I don't remember the exact years or how old they were, but they were living in California because they were sent there to do service work. And so they worked at a mental institution when they were in California, and they ended up having my uncle while they were there. And then when they came back, that's when my grandpa started farming and my grandma worked at a newspaper press. And so it's like when they were my age, they weren't even living in Nebraska. They didn't have a house. They were still kind of navigating life. And when you look at it like that, it's like, okay, so yes, like my grandparents are people I really respect and I really look up to, but at my age, they were not doing what they set out to do until they hit that retirement age, right? So that is where I think we can get a little bit, I don't know. I feel like they kind of just put the false impression in our minds that once you graduate, you're set on a path. That's the path you take forever until you retire. But for most people, that is not really what life looks like. And so something I want to share with you too is that your purpose is what creates impact or outcome. Your purpose is not the outcome. So your purpose is what's backing everything, right? Your outcome is maybe the job you have or the position you hold or the title you have, but your purpose drives meaning to what you do, but also your purpose and meaning are not the same thing. So that's kind of another way to think about it too. So purpose and meaning are kind of an equation. So you've got your purpose plus meaning equals your occupation or your role. And so the definition of meaning is the purpose underlying or intended by speech, action, etc. So again, purpose is always what's underlying, but it is not the result. So this makes me always think of that quote too. That's like, we should be working to live, not living to work. And I think especially in society today, I think like the term girl boss or having a side hustle or being just a very successful and having a lot of money, having a big house, having a car, like that's very impressive to everyone. Being able to go on vacations, like that has always been, I feel like that's just always been very glamorized in our society. And I think it's different in other countries. I don't feel like it's the same way everywhere. But here, it's almost like your job has to make you a lot of money just so you can live the life that would make everybody around you envious. And I just don't feel like myself, like that is really my drive anymore. I feel like that used to be when I was looking at different jobs. When I was in college, it was like, oh yeah, like this would make me however much money, sweet. Like I could put myself through however many hours a week, 40 to 60 hours a week, just so I could make a lot of money. So then we could buy a house and we could get a vacation house. And then you start to think like, but what would that be fulfilling for me? What do I feel like I lack that would be fulfilling? And so, that is kind of a side note, but also something to kind of put this on perspective too, of like the external validation and appearance doesn't really mean a whole lot if you don't feel like you're truly living a purpose-filled life of value. And so you might be wondering too, like, well, then what is my purpose? And another way to put your purpose as well is that it's similar to the ultimate goal you have in life or the vision for how you wish your life would be. But it's not so much of like the external, what things would look like, but how you would feel in your life, right? You want to feel appreciated, maybe. You want to feel valued, like you're helping somebody. Maybe that is how you feel fulfilled, is if you get to help other people or care for other people. And then that in return is going to lead you to the occupation that you might hold one day. But that always comes second. Okay, so I'm going to go into kind of breaking down purpose and how you can go about navigating this. So first off, I just want to reassure you that you don't have to have one main purpose. And I really don't believe we were born with one main purpose, right? We were all born with a purpose. Count how many times I say that this episode, because it's probably going to be a lot. But when we were put on this earth, I do believe that God places things on our heart for a reason. But there are so many purposes for you in this lifetime. So for me, I view my purpose as being a helper. And so this is kind of similar to the Enneagram. I don't know if you've done that. I'm an Enneagram 2, which is the helper. And that could be a good tool for you to use if you're still just confused on maybe what your purpose is. But I don't really think you would need to do that. After this episode, I think you'll maybe have a good idea of what that looks like for you. So I'm going to go through just some examples too of me being a helper and how I was able to narrow this down. So there are so many purposes that come with being a helper. And so the first one would be to be a kind and considerate friend. So if I'm able to help friends talk through struggles when they need to, or just even send them messages when I'm thinking about them, I think with friendships, it is helpful to feel cared for. Right? If you feel cared for by a friend, you're much more likely to reach out to them because you know that they really are there for you and they really do want to guide you and help in the ways that they can. Next one would be to be a thoughtful wife. And so every morning I make almost every morning, I should say, I make my husband coffee, and then I make most of our meals throughout the day as well, because I know with my job, it has a little more flexibility than his does. And so that is a way that I can help him out, is by taking away the added stress of having to make food. This also looks like being a respectful daughter, so showing interest in what my parents are doing and reaching out to them to spend time with them when I miss them. So this also means showing appreciation for the things that they maybe have paid for in the past or continue to and support me with. And so I do have a little story with this, because I think this kind of shows where I also value other people's help. And so last year I was pretty dead set on having a food truck. And so I wanted to have a food truck that had gourmet overnight oats. And I actually went out and I bought the camper to do it with. And I brought it home, and I should back up actually, because when I went there to go buy it, the roof was leaking. And I remember seeing that and just being like, oh, it's fine. I can totally fix that. Like, no problem. When in reality, I was definitely thinking this is not a good idea, but I really hate telling people no. And so when they were like, well, are you ready to take it? I was just like, yeah, let's do it. So I drove it all the way home by myself and to my parents because they have a shop here and we were still living in Omaha. So they had a shop here that I could hold it at. And I just remember my parents going out and seeing it, and they're like, Bailey, you didn't. I'm like, what? It's going to be great. It's so cute, isn't it? And like in the daylight, honestly at nighttime, you could see the dents in this thing from hail or from a storm. It just looked like a disaster. But my parents still helped me gut the whole thing along with my husband. We gutted it all out. And my dad helped with a lot of the heavy lifting. We were already trying to brainstorm ways that we could use it. And, me just knowing that I overpaid for this told my dad it was much cheaper than it was. And so he's like, I sure hope you didn't spend a lot on this because this thing's a disaster as we got more into it. And, well, we finally came to the conclusion that it was a little bit beyond repair or a little out of our wheelhouse. And so my dad decided he did need a deer blind, and so he would buy it from me for what he thought I paid for it, which was much less than I actually did, and ended up using it as his deer blind. And, yes, my parents were like, oh my gosh, Bailey, what are you doing? But they still helped me out. And I think that's kind of the parent I'm going to strive to be too, is like, as a helper. And my parents, I see that characteristic in them, and that's something they really value as well. It doesn't mean that maybe you always agree with what somebody's doing or you always think it's the best idea, but still supporting someone and even just being that person that they can go to when they need someone's help, right? Like, as that being what I truly believe my purpose is, I really find value in doing that for other people. And so that they did that for me was honestly pretty great, even though it kind of ended up being a fail. It was a really good time, and I just know that they have supported me so much throughout my life that just showing them that in return is something that I've started to value, especially as I've gotten older too. The next one too would be being a supportive sister. So I have a younger brother, so showing up for his sporting events, I know how important that was for him when he was in high school, because it just makes him feel loved, and it also, I'm sure, helps with his mindset when he knows that somebody's there that cares about him, that cares about not just his performance, but him as a person, and having, me being there to support him is important. And so that's a role that I like to, help through. Another one would be to be an empathetic coach. And so I am an anti-inflammatory focused holistic health coach. And so most of my days look like guiding clients through our coaching sessions while also offering feedback when it's wanted. But also, I do a lot more listening than talking. And this really helps clients to kind of process what they should do in specific situations. And I've honestly realized that a lot of times to help people, you just have to listen more than you talk. And it seems kind of the opposite, right? Like, we should have to talk more so they can get more of our opinions, but a lot of people just need somebody that's going to listen and truly care about them, because that helps with their whole thought process. And so I want you to take some time right now that I gave some examples to write out or brainstorm what you might believe your purpose to be. And so if you're driving, please do not write this out, but just think about something as I'm talking, or a list of different purposes that you think you have. With mine being helper, I've also realized that it is actually kind of changing, which I'll share about in a second too. But I think knowing what your purpose is, and if you don't know it, that's okay too, but that brainstorming, right? Just thinking a little bit deeper, pushing a little bit deeper, and actually figuring out what that is for you is going to help you in so many different other areas of your life. Okay, so the second one that I want to share with you too is that your purpose changes throughout your lifespan. So the more that you resist it, the more you resist this change, the more you'll realize later why it was evolving. So you might have wished that you didn't avoid the feelings you had and instead just let it run its course. And I always really believe that sometimes you just have to test the waters before you find out what it is that fulfills both your purpose and your meaning, right? We talked about meaning and purpose together equals a job, but it is not just your purpose that equals, just that title you give yourself. And I have an example for this one, which the camper was a great example because that I just had to let run its course. I feel like at that point I had some mindset things I was going through, my own personal struggles, and I thought maybe that would be a good band-aid, a good way to focus my attention off of myself and into a project. And that just kind of backfired. But another example with this is OT school. So when I graduated college, I was very much not really into going to OT school, and I was thinking I would go more into worksite wellness. Well, turns out I filled out an OT school application. I went to the tours, did the interviews, and I actually had gotten into school for occupational therapy, but at the same time, I was working at a OT clinic where they were doing mostly hand therapy, and I just remember absolutely hating that job. I would watch what they were doing and it just looked boring. They had so much paperwork they had to do every single night. They weren't the most pleasant people to always be working with, and so it just really didn't make me excited to get into the field of OT. And so that was something I kind of had to let run its course, right? I had to apply to school, do all of that work. Even if I wasn't really on board with it, I was like, I can put myself through schooling just to have something that I can fall back on, that I can do as a job, even though it wasn't really a passion of mine. And then through that too, I got a job and realized I didn't love it. And then I kind of changed direction after that. And no, like I've been saying, my purpose is not my final occupation, but I realized that a lot of what OT does did not, in some way, just was not fulfilling to me. It didn't feel like something I'd want to do forever. And when you start looking at the cost of schooling, you very quickly realize like $200,000 to $400,000 for me to become an OT. Maybe I can use that money in a different way, or obviously not use all of that money, and find something that I really find value in for myself and something I could see myself doing more long term. And so I had to let this run its course, right? I thought OT would fulfill that purpose and that it had all of those characteristics of a purpose, my purpose, right? It was a helping position. I could connect with people, but it really just didn't align. And so my purpose throughout my lifespan changed, even in a year it changed. And so, if you think about this too, as a college student, your purpose was to spend time navigating what your interests are, exploring your beliefs about yourself, envisioning where you would fit in the workforce, and maybe what you could see fulfilling your meaning in life. But at the same time, your purpose has never solely been to get good grades or to network, get a high-paying job, or work for the next 50 years at it. So you can see how our purpose supports the result, right? But the result is not our purpose. And so I've said that multiple times, but I think that is something that's so hard to get integrated into our mind, especially for me. Like it took me up until, I would say, past maybe 6 months to really realize this. Like, oh, my purpose is not the job that I hold. What do you mean? Like every time somebody asks about, me, they ask what I'm doing. They don't ask, what I'm passionate about or what my purpose is, but they say, what's your job? And I always linked the two. Well, I like to help people, so my job is, whatever. You know what I do. But that was always so skewed in my mind of how we don't really look at the characteristics in somebody. We look at what things look like on the outside, like a job title. That's something we can easily label ourselves with and link our purpose to. But it's so much deeper than that. It's so much more, specific to what we were put on earth to do. And that's never been our job. Even though our job is important, making money is important, that is not always the first, though that is always the first thing somebody asks about you. And I think that ever since I graduated college and didn't really know what I wanted my life to look like? That was such a frustrating question for me. And I remember my mom saying, it's because people care, that's why they ask. I'm like, I understand that people care, and so that's why they ask what you're doing. But I just feel like asking people something a little bit more deep than that would be appreciated, especially out of college, So like one way that you could do this too, instead of somebody that's just graduated college of like, oh, well, where are you working? What are you doing? You could say, well, what do you value? Like, what do you feel like fulfills you? Okay, well, I would be much more inclined to answer that question than, well, what are you doing for a job? Because it's so much easier to talk about yourself when you're asked something deeper than just like, what do you do for a job? Because that's pretty surface level, right? Like, well, yeah, you're an accountant. Okay, well, let's peel back the layers of like, what fulfills you? What do you do every day that fulfills you? And maybe your job does fulfill you, but there's probably a reason it does. It's because you are supporting people. You are building connections. You're building relationships. You are respected. You are respectful of others. There are so many things that you can kind of section out of your overall job that you realize, okay, that's my purpose, and that has led then to that occupation. All right. So right now too, another way that I see my purpose will be changing in the next, 5 years is right now my purpose of being a helper is fulfilled by being a good wife to my husband, being a good coach to my clients, right? Helping them out, being a support system for them, being selfless when I handle those interactions and caring. But one day that might change and I might be a selfless and caring and helpful mom, And so that will change and my role will change with that, and that is okay. So main takeaway from this is your purpose will change, and that is okay. All right. So what if your purpose changes? Let's get into that. So first off, like I just said, it's all right. It's all right if it changes. You don't have to have your whole life figured out right now. And I want you to find reassurance in that. Like, that's exciting. Like, you can change. Your life can change. What your interests are can change. Obviously, like, kind of where I'm at this point is they've changed so much that it's like, all right, Bailey, we gotta stick with something and just ride it. We just got to go all the way with it and see how long it takes you. 5 years from now, let's just keep doing what we're doing. But if you're the opposite, if you're like, oh, I have this one job I got right out of college, I have to be here for 5 years before I can apply for another job. No, you don't. I'm sorry, but you do not. Like, that is going to change because your purpose is changing, right? So, with this too, throughout coaching, I've always thought that my purpose was to help and guide people towards their greatest health. But more recently, I've also realized like it's not really fulfilling my entire purpose. And so that doesn't mean I just abandoned ship by any means, but I've also realized that connecting with others and building relationships is something I really, really value and find that my purpose is fulfilled within doing. And so, when I have this coaching business, I work online all day with the exception of a few coaching calls that can feel kind of isolating to just work through your computer. And so, it also, if people don't show interest in what you're doing, you feel like you aren't doing enough, you aren't doing good enough, or you're just speaking to an empty room, like nobody really cares. But in reality, when you have an online business, you don't really see how often people maybe look at your Instagram page for recipe inspiration or use your membership platform with workouts or, you know what I'm saying with that. It's like you don't see everything that goes on. You see very, very little of the actual result of what you're putting out into the world. And so that makes me feel like I'm not fulfilling the role of being a helper because I don't see that personal result, in-person result. And so this has also led me then to brainstorm how I can connect with more people in real life because my purpose, which I would have never guessed because I'm pretty introverted, is to connect with other people and build those relationships. And so when I make these meaningful connections, I feel very, very fulfilled. And so within my own business, I'm not, like I said, abandoning ship, like, oh, I guess I got to find something completely other to do than coaching. But it's incorporating other aspects into what I'm doing that fulfill my additional purposes in life. And, I use help as a helper and a connector as 2 examples. There are so many, but like I said, this will look different for you than it does for me. But I think those examples work really well because, that's what I'm noticing right now in real time. Those are kind of the 2 that continue to stand out year after year. And so within my business, this might look like having in-person workshops, or outside of my business, meeting up with new friends or my friends that I have right now and hosting fun events. Like I just had my 24th birthday party and I had 9 friends over and we did a meal, we had cake, and we took photos and just had a really good conversation. It was just such a good time. And that is something like I felt so fulfilled after that evening because, again, personal connection. And I was able to provide for them with a meal and cake and a house to, spend time in together and a table to eat around. And that just made me feel very fulfilled. And so this could also look like, in-person fitness classes or going for walks with friends or family members. Or when I was in Omaha, I was working at Stir, which is a coffee shop. And it was so enjoyable for me because I had a part-time job where I could socialize very frequently, right? I said my job, my occupation, yes, it supports my purpose, but it can feel isolating. So getting that connection with working at a coffee shop was exactly what I needed. And I felt so aligned with that role because I could see a direct result of the product I was creating, right? I was making a good warm cup of coffee and I could give it to somebody and see how happy it made them. And that was so fulfilling. And so, as I talk about my purpose, if you're like, I have no idea what mine is, you don't need to be worried about that, right? Because you don't need to worry if you aren't sure what your purpose is, because so often in life, we already stress about finding the right thing, right? When it comes to a job or a sport that we're good at, or a class we want to take in college, or a major, or finding the perfect partner or spouse, or finding a house. Those are things we already put so much pressure on to be right, to be perfect. And so we can eliminate the pressure of having it figured out right now and right away, because your purpose should never make you feel like a failure or disappointment. Because your purpose is what you were put here on earth to do. That's something that's not going to change. I mean, it's going to change. I shouldn't say that. It will change. But even more so than changing, it's just going to evolve. Your purpose is going to continue to evolve as you get older and as your role in life changes. But you can't really change what you feel you add value to, right? Or what makes you feel valued. You can't really change that. And so you're never failing or disappointing anybody by living out the purpose you have, right? And so I say this too because this comes from someone who is extremely organized to the point of OCD. Like I am always had my life mapped out perfectly, and I realized that I was always focused on the end goal, which was a job, and it was never focused on the characteristics that I had within myself to fulfill that job. It was never the supporting character, it was always the main character, I guess is a good way to put it, right? Your purpose is a supporting character. Your final job or the final role you have in life is, I would say, I guess it's kind of the main character, but in this instance, your supporting characters are much more valuable than the main character, because without them, you wouldn't have that as a result. And so, I went to college with a plan. In high school already, I was researching what I wanted to do. Started with art therapy, went to occupational therapy. I left college with a plan, was going to be an OT. And then I decided I wanted to do worksite wellness. And my plans changed. And I looked at jobs and found there's very few around here to do worksite wellness. So then I ended up working 3 jobs at the same time my first year out of college, made very, very little money. And then the next year I had 2 different jobs within 1 year. I also applied and got accepted into grad school, but decided not to go. Then at 22, as a little baby, I started my own business, which I'm still doing now. But that's not because I haven't applied to other jobs too. Like I've applied to other jobs in the past 3 years. And I also have lived in 4 different places in the past 3 years. So like my life has changed a lot. And when all of this was happening, I was so unfulfilled because I felt like my purpose was not being lived out because I hadn't found the one thing I would do for the next 50 years. But in retrospect, I can see that I was still able to live out my purpose when I was in all of those positions. When I was in all of those different situations, I was still living out my purpose because it changed and it molded into those different positions, but it has always been with me to want to help and to crave connections. That's always been within me. But when I was so focused on that external view of myself, what people would say about me if I didn't have something set in stone that I would do for the rest of my life, I didn't feel like my purpose was being fulfilled, when in reality, like, it was being fulfilled the whole time. I just didn't realize it. And so I want you to take away from this that you can live out your purpose if you still have no idea what you want your life to look like, right? So often what stops us from just doing what would fulfill our purpose is what it would look like on the outside to people, what your family might think, or how much money you want to be making, which is valid, but let me tell you, that is not everything. Okay, so I want to kind of wrap this up with a final story that I really felt really connected to this summer, because this summer, earlier, I would say around May, I was feeling like I was really lacking purpose. But that's because I was linking it to the wrong things. So I was constantly stressed about money, about my business, about feeling like I wasn't really even helping anyone, even though I was. Like, I had clients at this time. I just didn't feel like I was really doing I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. I was just in a very sad, overwhelmed, confused state. And in May, I was making more money than I had since I graduated college. But I truly felt no different as a person, right? I always thought, like, yeah, if I have a job where I make a lot of money and yada yada, whatever, I could buy this and that, like, I would feel so fulfilled and like my life had value because I had the external evidence of this. But the thing with that is I was chasing worldly things, but the world cannot fulfill us, right? It could not fulfill me. And so I was talking to a friend about this, and she had encouraged me to read Ecclesiastes. And I talked about that in a little bit in the beginning of this episode. And so after listening to that or reading that book, I just had voice memoed her, like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I needed to hear, right? It talks about how so much in life is meaningless. And when we link it to all of the external and worldly things, we realize how meaningless a lot of things are. But what is within us, with having faith and with having our mind and body and spirit be all connected, and to truly care about the people around us and look at life in such a deeper lens than just the external appearance, we find so much more value and meaning to our life. And so I remember her also, she was voice memoing me back and forth, and she was talking about too, like, at the end of our life, you're not going to be remembered by how much money you made or how successful your business was, because those are two things that were really stressing me out at the time. And she said, you're going to be remembered by how you treated your husband and the grace and love you showed him, or how you cared for your friends and how special you made them feel through those relationships, or how you transformed women's lives by just giving them someone to talk to that would truly listen to what they had to say. And that was such an aha moment for me, because I realized that I can still live out my purpose regardless of my title, occupation, or income. And that although, yes, those things do matter, but if you're stuck on what you want to do with your life or the next 1 to 5 years, I would encourage you to find your purpose first and then find a job that aligns with that. So 2 things to wrap this out. One activity that I would give you to do is I want you to make a list of what you believe your purpose to be. And then I want you to write out your job or your occupation that you're striving to do one day, and write out every role that you would fulfill in that job. So I'm thinking of like a nurse. So you would take care of other people. You would administer medications. You would build a relationship with a doctor or physician. You would, care for your patient and make them feel comforted when they're very sick. So those would be, different roles you would have within that job or occupation. And then on the other side, I want you to look at your purposes and draw a link to each one. So in this example, if I was looking like, okay, my purpose was helper, relationship builder, comforter, yes, those would all fit very well with the role of being a nurse. Not saying that maybe that's something you want to do for the rest of your life, but it's something that would fulfill the purpose that you have for yourself. So I want to wrap this all up in just a pretty little bow and give you a few ways that you can find your purpose in life. If, like I said, you're the one who's like, I have no idea what it is, no stress, it's okay, but these might be other ways that help you out with this. So first, you should focus on developing a growth mindset. So this means that you are open to what is happening around you, similar to how I said, being okay to changes within your purpose, right? Not resisting change and taking everything as a learning opportunity rather than success or failure. This is going to help you feel like you have a sense of purpose too, because nothing in your life is ever a fail, but it's always an opportunity to learn more about you, what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy, where you feel fulfilled, and what your values are. The second one is going to be to practice gratitude. So when you wake up in the morning, write 3 things that you're grateful for. At the end of the day, write 3 things that went really well. When you practice gratitude, it just completely shifts your mindset. And trust me, I know it might sound cheesy or corny. This is something I never used to do. I thought that was really just for hippies, people that thought that their mind could really control what's around them. And practicing gratitude does not control what's happening around you, but it controls your mindset about what's happening around you. It makes you see things in a better light and focus on the positives of your day rather than just being negative and constantly feeling like your life is not going how you anticipated it to or wanted it to go. I would also encourage number 3 would be to write out what you could do today to feel accomplished. Because when we write out our to-do list for the day, we probably have 200 different things on there. But what is one thing that you could do that day where you could go to bed and be like, wow, like I did that. That was exactly what I set out to do, and that is exactly what I did. That is also going to help you feel so much self-worth and respect yourself so much more in what you're doing in life, because you are not just going through life with no plan, no structure, and just banking on your purpose to drive you. Rather, you are focusing on specific intentions that you're setting for the day and then how you can fulfill them. The fourth one, would be to be part of a community. So this is something that I myself am working to do, but when you're part of a community or even a group of friends, you are able to see so many different personalities, hear so many different people's stories and outlooks on life, different opinions, different thought processes, and it puts a lot of things in perspective for you, right? So when I was at that brunch on Saturday, I was hearing what other people do as a job, and I was inspired because these women were so successful and they didn't ever give a money amount of how much money they made. They didn't really even just put all of their conversation into their occupation, but rather I just got to be in a room with people that were very smart, knew what they wanted from life right now, and that was just really inspiring. And to also hear just the different roles they play in their life outside of their occupation made me realize how important that social interaction, the community is, getting involved in your community is, and supporting your friends in their own projects. And then along with that too is just spending time with people who inspire you. If you would tell somebody, hi, I would really like to go get coffee with you. You inspire me so much and I just want to learn more from you. I could almost guarantee 9 times out of 10 that person will not say, oh my gosh, no way, I don't want to spend time with you and have coffee. No, if you're telling somebody that, wow, I love what you're doing and I love how you treat people and the role that you play in this community, would you be willing to go get coffee? I could almost guarantee they're always going to say yes, because people like to know that what they're doing is being well received, and that would be a really great way to build connections, but also learn more from somebody else, which always just greatly expands our own knowledge and helps us to self-reflect even more deeply. Okay, so I feel like I gave you a lot to work on. I hope you are not feeling overwhelmed. Again, this should not be overwhelming. You can't fail at your purpose. You can't be a disappointment if you're living out your purpose. That is comforting. That is good to know, because it's like, I don't have to have it all figured out, but I can just do my best every single day and take small, gradual steps towards whatever it is that I want from this life that align with my values and the core mission I feel like I have for myself. And you're right on track, right? So before we close this in prayer, which we do at the end of every episode, I do want to just remind you that if you leave a rating, 5-star rating or review on this podcast, it would help me out so much. But also screenshot that and send it over to me on Instagram at bailey-seaton with 2 Y's and 2 N's, or on Facebook. It's the same username through Messenger. That way I can see that you wrote the review or gave the rating. And at the end of the year, I'm actually going to be drawing for a wellness bundle. And so I'll be sharing on my Instagram and Facebook more of what that will look like here as we get closer to the end of the year. But screenshot that, send it to me, or even just share with me a good takeaway you had from this episode, and I'll get you entered into that giveaway as well. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and close in prayer. So, dear Lord, thank you so much for this day and the opportunity that I have to both connect and talk to the person on the other side of this mic. I just ask that you would place finding their purpose on their heart, and that they explore that more deeply. If they feel lost, that they feel comforted, and that they just understand that they don't have to have everything figured out to, live a fulfilled life or to bring value to other people's lives, that they were put here uniquely because of you, and that it's with your help that we're able to navigate our own lives and figure out things along the way, right? That we can be comforted and that they are comforted by that understanding as well. I just ask that you would bring the utmost health to them, and that they just feel inspired to nurture their mind, body, and spirit throughout this next week until we talk again, and that you would just keep them safe and healthy. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Thank you again so much for listening. I'm so darn grateful for you, and I'll talk to you very soon. Bye.